So, in this presentation, we're going to talk about parenting and parenting styles and the kinds of behaviors that parents use and how that can impact children differently. One aspect of parenting that has been studied that we know can have an impact on children is the type of discipline that children use, and especially harsh physical punishment can be linked to higher rates of aggression. So, children who receive more and especially more harsh uh, physical punishment are more likely to have higher rates of aggression. And think about why that might be so. Uh, One reason is that children are getting a model there that if you want somebody to do what you want them to do, one way is to exert physical force over them. Another reason is, as we'll see in a minute, uh, children who are who receive really punitive kinds of discipline practice, they're not getting a lot of support in developing their own internal sense of right and wrong. Their behavior is really directed to avoid that external punishment. And so if there's not the fear of external punishment there, they don't have those that internalized sense of discipline. Another risk factor that anyone who's working with children and family needs to understand is that there's a risk, especially when there's high levels of stress, especially when families have fewer social support. There's a risk that harsh, intense physical kind of punishment can become physical abuse. And that does not mean, and don't misunderstand me, I'm not saying that everyone who spanks their child will become an abuser of their children. That's not all I'm saying at all. But the opposite is true. Everyone who physically abuses their children spank their children. And so in those situations where someone is under undue stress, when someone is under that uh, sort of they just can't cope, that punishment can cross a line and sort of get out of their control. So strong emotional support of parents reduces that link. When parents are very emotionally supportive, it reduces that link between harsh punishment and negative outcomes. uh, Negative harsh punishment is associated with quicker or immediate compliance, but long-term non-compliance, and it's associated with lower levels of moral development. Having said that, most parents in the US spank their 3 to 4 year old children at least occasionally. Uh, but because of those long-term negative consequences, because of that higher risk of sort of sneaky behavior, if a child doesn't think they'll get caught, and that lower internalized sense of right and wrong, poorer grades, impacted social interaction, it's important that professionals who are working with children and families recognize that it's important to teach parents alternative sources of discipline. Unfortunately, there are many parents who feel like physical punishment is the only kind of discipline they can use, and they see a lack of physical punishment as being an overall lack of discipline, and that doesn't need to be the case. So it's important that we teach parents that there are alternative ways that we can still have high expectations and strict uh, guidelines for our children without the physical punishment. In just a minute about child abuse, there's a more detailed uh, indicators of child abuse on the course Canvas, but just a little information here. About 80% of abusers are either parents or step parents. So children are more likely to be abused by their parent. The exception to this is sexual abuse, where the abusers are more likely to be friends, neighbors, or other relatives, but they're still more likely to be someone the child knows. Abuse is most common in families where there is significant financial strain and a lot of stress that comes with that. So, times of financial hardship, because they're associated with that increased stress and that lower levels of coping, are associated with that anger that gets out of hand and can lead to abusive situations. And this is the percentage of abuse cases by type of abuse. And so if we look at all of the abuse cases that are reported, about 75% of those are cases of neglect, where a child isn't receiving the things they need, uh, the kind of resources they need. About 17% are physical abuse, about 8% is sexual abuse, less than 7% is characterized as other. It wasn't classified into any of these categories. About 6% is psychological, and about 2% were children who did not receive medical care that was needed. I mentioned that there was this sometimes a view that a lack of physical discipline is a lack of any discipline. And I want to present you now with this domains of parenting style. This is from a theorist and researcher named Diane Baumrind, who observed uh, and interviewed families over many years and classified parenting behavior into four categories. And the categories are based on these dimensions of control and demandingness, but also of acceptance and responsiveness. And so sometimes people think of uh, that parenting as only having one dimension between control and demandingness. You're either in control or you're permissive. But Baumrind adds this other category, which makes it sort of adds an extra dimension of acceptance and responsiveness. So a given parent could be high in control and demandingness, so they have high expectations. They are firm in their uh, demands, but they're also low in acceptance and warmth and responsiveness. That parent is authoritarian. But a parent could be high in control and demandingness and have just as strict set of expectations for the child's behavior, but also high in acceptance and responsiveness. And that parent would be called authoritative. There are parents who are low in both, and they're called indifferent or neglectful. And there's parents who are high in the acceptance and responsiveness, but low in control and demandingness, and they're called indulgent or permissive. I'll talk about each of those a little bit. But first, that group that's low in both control and warmth and responsiveness, they're known as indifferent or neglectful style. These parents have few rules. Uh, there's little affection. There's little responsiveness. So if the infant might cry and no one responds, there's little interest in what the childs are doing. At the extreme, this can be neglect. Um, Children who are living in this kind of family structure are faced with some real challenges, and they are more likely to show lower levels of self-control, lower levels of achievement, and higher levels of delinquency as they grow older. That group that's high in acceptance and warmth and responsiveness, but low in control and demandingness, is known as indulgent or permissive. So low control, high warmth and acceptance. These families have fewer rules. There's not a lot of discipline, but there's a lot of warmth and support. Uh, this is where we would say the child looks spoiled. Okay, the child outcomes here. The children have lower levels of self control, lower levels of achievement, higher levels of delinquency, but they are very socially skilled, very self-confident. They feel good about their abilities, and they're also peer oriented. They care about the opinions and beliefs of others. The authoritarian style that's high on control, low on acceptance. This is the my way or the highway, because I said so. Uh, I'll give you something to cry about sort of parenting style. They tend to be punitive. They tend to use power assertive discipline. And what we see is situational compliance. Children uh, will comply rapidly when they're told to do something by the authoritarian parent because they want to avoid that possible punishment. But there's long-term non-compliance and this higher rate of sneaky behavior. If they think they're not going to get caught, they may try it because they haven't developed this internal sense of I don't want to do that because it can have negative effects on other people. They have adequate achievement and lower levels of reported self-confidence. The authoritative style is high on both control and high on acceptance. These parents have rules, and they mean their rules, and they'll follow through on their rules. But the rules are designed with the child's best interest in mind, not just the parents' convenience. And they will give rules, or they'll give reasons for their rules and redirections. This is called induction. It's not always a big long justification. It may be very short, like walk inside, I'm afraid you're going to fall, or set that down so it doesn't break. But they give that little bit of reasoning that explains, child, your behavior can have this effect, and it's your behavior. It's not me saying you have to do this. It's not me saying uh, because I said so. The rule is there because your behavior can have an impact. And so here we see the highest level of internalizing a sense of right and wrong. And these children are more likely to make positive choices when there's no one around to supervise them, because they've internalized that sort of decision matrix. So we see higher levels of self-control in their behavior. This is also the group that's associated with highest levels of achievement, the highest social competence, self-esteem, and they're more likely to have secure attachment with their parents. Now, parents in any of those different family structures can be sensitive, they can be authoritative, uh, within any family structure, intact families, divorced families, blended families, single parent families, uh, higher the quality of parenting is associated with children doing better and having better outcomes. So family structure is important, but the quality of parenting within the family structure can be more important. It, Here's the flip side: family structure can influence the quality of parenting. So when a family structure can bring with it stress and conflict and financial stress, and those stressors make it more likely that people will revert to sort of power assertive disciplinary practices, or back away and be permissive or neglectful. Now, there are some complex interactions between culture and ethnicity and parenting styles, and the behavior that looks the same can have different meanings in different cultures, and it can represent different things. And that means that the same sort of behavior can have different outcomes for children because of uh, those different cultural expectations. And here's an example of that. Authoritarian parenting, that very strict, power assertive kind of parenting, is linked to more behavior problems and lower achievement if we look at the group of children overall in the United States. But if we start to look at smaller groups of children and we parcel them out by culture and ethnicity, we can see that the effects are weaker for Black and for Asian children. And in fact, for Asian children, authoritarian parenting can be linked to higher rates of academic achievement. So why would that be? And it's because there's this, and I don't want to paint with ethnic gloss here to paint that everyone's the same, but the stereotype is for Asian American parenting that there's more of an emphasis and belief that training and repetition can improve academic performance, whereas the mainstream U.S. middle class belief is that performance is more linked to innate kinds of characteristics. So when you pair together that belief that training and repetition are beneficial with a stricter regimen, then that can be associated with more positive academic outcomes for children within that culture. Um, so the culture can have an impact. Also, aspects of authoritarian parenting may be interpreted differently. So it can be seen as this is a sign of involvement or a sign of caring rather than a sign of rejection. So be aware that when we talk about the impact of parenting style on children's outcomes, that's coming with it the assumption that everything works the way it works in middle class families or in white families. And that's not always the case. And there can be cultural differences in how these impact children.